The emergency board meeting at Nexus Technologies was supposed to be routine damage control. Instead, chaos erupted when their revolutionary AI system crashed during the biggest product demonstration of the year, threatening to destroy a billion-dollar deal with the Department of Defense. Senior programmers panicked. No one dared promise a fix in time. Matthew Sindrell, a quiet janitor mopping floors in the corner, watched the mayhem unfold with knowing eyes. CEO Kira Thalvin, 29, brilliant, ruthless, and notorious for her cutting arrogance, turned to him with a venomous smile. "If you can somehow fix what my entire engineering team cannot," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "I'll not only keep you employed, I'll kiss you right here in front of everyone." What she didn't know was that Matthew wasn't just any janitor. He was a former MIT prodigy who'd sacrificed everything for his 8-year-old daughter Emma. And today, her cruel challenge would change both their lives forever. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Kira Thalvin ruled her empire from the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of downtown Ashbrook. At 29, she was the youngest CEO in Nexus Technologies history, having clawed her way to the top through a combination of ruthless intelligence and calculated ambition that left competitors speechless and employees trembling. Her corner office was a monument to perfection. Minimalist furniture arranged with mathematical precision, awards displayed at exact angles, and not a single item out of place. Everything in Kira's world existed to serve a purpose, and that purpose was maintaining her position at the apex of the tech industry. She had transformed Nexus Technologies from a struggling startup into a $3 billion artificial intelligence powerhouse in just 5 years, earning her the grudging respect of Silicon Valley and the fear of everyone beneath her. Kira's daily routine was as precise as her office decor. She arrived at exactly 6:30 a.m., reviewed overnight reports while her assistant prepared her morning briefing, and spent the next 14 hours orchestrating deals that could make or break entire companies. Her reputation for brilliance was matched only by her reputation for cruelty. She had fired 3 department heads in the past month alone, each dismissal delivered with the same cold efficiency she applied to everything else. The tech world knew her as the Ice Princess of AI, a nickname she wore like armor. Emotion was weakness, relationships were distractions, and sentiment was the fastest way to lose everything she had built. Her personal life was equally controlled. Strategic dinner dates with investors, carefully curated social media presence, and a penthouse apartment that looked more like a showroom than a home. What the world didn't know was that Kira's perfectionism was built on a foundation of terror. She had grown up watching her father's tech company crumble when he made the mistake of trusting the wrong partner. The bankruptcy had destroyed their family, forcing them from their mansion into a cramped apartment where her parents' marriage disintegrated under the weight of financial stress. Her mother had left when Kira was 16, unable to handle the shame of their fallen status. That experience had taught Kira that success was the only shield against humiliation, and that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had vowed never to be vulnerable again, never to depend on anyone whose loyalty couldn't be bought or whose performance couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. Every relationship in her life served a business purpose. Every friendship was really a networking opportunity, and every interaction was a transaction. 41 floors below Kira's pristine office, Matthew Sindrell pushed his cleaning cart through the maze of cubicles that housed Nexus Technologies' programming department. At 35, he possessed the kind of quiet dignity that came from accepting circumstances beyond his control, while refusing to let them define his worth. His custodial uniform was always clean and pressed, his work ethic unquestionable, and his presence so unobtrusive that most employees forgot he existed the moment he left their site. Matthew's shift began at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. A schedule that allowed him to be home when Emma woke up and available for school pickup. He moved through the building with practiced efficiency, emptying trash bins, vacuuming carpets, and sanitizing surfaces while the digital displays around him flickered with code. He understood better than most of the people who wrote it. His life revolved entirely around Emma, his 8-year-old daughter who possessed her father's quick mind and her late mother's infectious laugh. Sarah had died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving Matthew to navigate single parenthood while grieving the loss of his soulmate. The life insurance settlement had been modest, enough to cover Emma's immediate needs, but not enough to sustain their previous lifestyle. Before Sarah's death, Matthew had been Dr. Matthew Sindrel, a rising star in the MIT Artificial Intelligence program with a PhD in computer science and 3 groundbreaking research papers to his name. Tech companies had competed for his attention, offering 6-figure salaries and stock options that could have made him wealthy. He had been on track to revolutionize machine learning algorithms when tragedy struck and priorities shifted overnight. The transition from academic prodigy to overnight single father had been brutal. Emma needed stability, not a father who disappeared into research labs for 16 hours at a time. She needed bedtime stories, not breakthrough algorithms. She needed a parent who would be there for scraped knees and school plays, not someone chasing the next Nobel Prize in computer science. So Matthew had made the hardest decision of his life. He walked away from everything he had worked toward and took the first job that offered the schedule Emma needed. Nexus Technologies' night custodial position paid a fraction of what he could have earned as a researcher, but it allowed him to be the father Emma deserved. Their apartment in Brookside was a far cry from the faculty housing they had once enjoyed, but Matthew had made it warm and inviting. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, her science projects occupied the kitchen table, and her laughter filled rooms that might otherwise have felt empty. She was brilliant like her father, already reading at a high school level and building simple robots from electronics kits they bought at garage sales. Every night, as Matthew cleaned the offices where his former peers now worked as senior developers and team leads, he reminded himself that he had made the right choice. Emma's happiness was worth more than any career achievement, her security more valuable than any professional recognition. When she looked at him with Sarah's bright eyes and called him the best daddy in the world, every sacrifice felt justified. But there were moments, usually in the quiet hours before dawn when he was alone with computer screens displaying code that sparked his old passion, when Matthew wondered what might have been. Not regret exactly, but a wistful acknowledgement of the path not taken. He still read research papers in his spare time, still followed developments in AI technology, still felt his pulse quicken when he encountered an elegant algorithm or an innovative approach to machine learning. His colleagues in the custodial department respected him for his reliability and kindness, though none suspected his background. The day shift programmers barely acknowledged his existence, treating him like part of the building's infrastructure rather than a human being with his own thoughts and expertise. He had grown accustomed to their dismissive glances and casual disregard, understanding that his uniform made him invisible to people who measured worth in job titles and salary figures. The irony was not lost on him that he spent his nights maintaining the workspace where some of his former classmates now held positions he could have easily filled. He recognized names on office doors, people who had once sought his input on their thesis projects and now looked right through him as he emptied their trash cans. But Matthew harbored no resentment toward them or toward the circumstances that had led him here. Emma was thriving, and that was all that mattered. Their evening routine was sacred. Homework help, dinner together, bedtime stories that often involved princesses who solved problems with science rather than magic. Emma was his universe, and everything else was just background noise. Even when exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders after particularly long shifts, her smile could restore his energy and remind him why every choice had been worth making. This Tuesday night had started like any other. With Matthew arriving at Nexus Technologies as the last of the day shift, employees headed home. He had methodically worked his way through the lower floors, maintaining the rhythm that made 8 hours pass efficiently. But as he reached the executive levels, something felt different. The tension in the air was palpable, the scattered papers, and abandoned coffee cups suggesting that people had left their offices in a hurry. He could hear raised voices echoing from the boardroom, an unusual occurrence for this time of night. Through the glass walls, he could see figures gesticulating frantically around the conference table, their body language speaking of crisis and desperation. Matthew continued his work, but his mind couldn't help analyzing the fragments of conversation that drifted into the hallway, technical terms and error codes that painted a picture of serious system failure. As he positioned his cart near the boardroom to begin cleaning the adjacent hallway, Matthew caught sight of Kira Thalvin for the first time. He had seen her photo in company newsletters and tech magazines, but witnessing her in person was different. She commanded the room with an intensity that was almost physical, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade as she demanded answers her team clearly couldn't provide. There was something magnetic about her presence, even in crisis, something that spoke of intelligence and determination that reminded him of his former world. But there was also something else, a brittleness beneath the polished exterior that suggested the control she projected came at a significant cost. As Matthew quietly began his work, he had no idea that within minutes, their worlds would collide in a way that would change everything for both of them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The crisis had begun innocuously enough, with a minor anomaly in the system logs that the night monitoring team had flagged as routine. By 11 p.m., however, that anomaly had cascaded into a complete system failure that threatened to destroy Nexus Technologies' most important deal in company history. The Prometheus AI system, 5 years and $2 billion in development, had crashed spectacularly during what was supposed to be its final demonstration before signing with the Department of Defense. Kira stood at the head of the boardroom table, her composure maintained through sheer force of will as she surveyed the chaos around her. Emergency meetings were supposed to be controlled affairs, but tonight had devolved into barely contained panic. Senior programmers hunched over laptops, their faces illuminated by error messages that seemed to multiply faster than they could address them. The department heads she had summoned looked like deer caught in headlights, each waiting for someone else to provide solutions they clearly didn't possess. "Status report," Kira demanded, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "And I want facts, not excuses." Dr. Reginald Foster, her chief technology officer, looked up from his tablet with the expression of a man facing professional execution. The Prometheus Core AI has experienced what appears to be a catastrophic logic cascade failure. The system isn't just offline, it's actively corrupting data structures as it attempts to restart. Meaning what, exactly? Kira's tone could have frozen nitrogen, meaning every time we try to bring it back online, it makes the problem worse. The AI is essentially trying to solve its own malfunction, but its solution protocols are creating new problems faster than they can resolve the original ones. It's like watching a dog chase its own tail, except each rotation creates more damage. Kira felt a familiar cold sensation spreading through her chest, the same feeling she had experienced as a teenager watching her father's company collapse. "How long until the Defense Department presentation?" 16 hours, whispered Dr. Amanda Cruz, the lead systems architect. "But at this rate, we won't have anything to demonstrate. The AI might not even boot up, let alone perform the advanced decision-making protocols they expect to see." The weight of the moment settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. The Defense Department contract represented more than just revenue. It was validation of everything Nexus Technologies had worked toward. Success would establish them as the premier AI development company in the world. Failure would mark them as another promising startup that couldn't deliver when it mattered most. Kira had built her reputation on turning impossible situations into triumphs, but this felt different. The technical details being thrown around by her team painted a picture of catastrophic system failure that went beyond simple debugging. The AI had somehow achieved a state of destructive recursion, essentially becoming its own worst enemy. What about backup systems? She asked, grasping for alternatives. The Prometheus AI was designed as a unique architecture, Dr. Foster explained. There's no backup system because the whole point was creating something that had never been done before. We can't just swap in replacement components because there aren't any. This system represents 5 years of custom development work. Alternative approaches? We could attempt to rebuild the core logic framework from scratch, but that would take months, possibly years. The algorithms that power Prometheus aren't simple programs we can rewrite overnight. They're evolved systems that learned and adapted over thousands of hours of training. Kira walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city. Lights while her mind raced through possibilities. Behind her, she could hear the desperate typing of programmers attempting solutions that everyone knew wouldn't work. The Defense Department had specifically chosen Nexus Technologies because of Prometheus's unique capabilities. No other AI system could perform the complex multivariable analysis and real-time decision-making they required. Options, she said, without turning around. I want every possible solution, no matter how unlikely. We could contact Dr. Sarah Williamson at Stanford, suggested Dr. Cruz. She's one of the few people who might understand the theoretical framework well enough to suggest an approach. Dr. Williamson is in Switzerland attending a conference, Dr. Foster replied. Even if we could reach her, she'd need days just to review our architecture before she could make any recommendations. What about bringing in outside consultants? Anyone with the expertise to tackle this problem would need weeks to understand our codebase. The Prometheus architecture is so complex that even our own team members only understand their specific components. Kira turned back to face the room, her frustration barely contained. Are you telling me that in a company of 300 software engineers, not one person can fix this problem? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Foster cleared his throat nervously. The issue isn't personnel, it's the nature of the problem itself. Prometheus has essentially achieved a state of recursive logical failure. Every diagnostic we run confirms that the AI is functioning exactly as designed, but the design itself has become corrupted. It's like trying to fix a broken mirror by looking at your reflection in the broken pieces. That's not acceptable, Kira snapped. Unacceptable problems don't exist in my company. There's always a solution, always a way forward. We just haven't found it yet. But even as she spoke those words, Kira could feel the familiar anxiety building in her chest. This was exactly the kind of catastrophic failure that had destroyed her father's company, a critical system failing at the worst possible moment, with no backup plan and no clear path to recovery. The Defense Department would not reschedule their evaluation. If Nexus Technologies couldn't deliver tomorrow, the contract would go to their competitors, and 5 years of work would be worthless. The financial implications were staggering. The Defense Department contract was worth $800 million over 5 years, but more importantly, it would establish Nexus Technologies as the government's preferred AI partner. Other federal agencies would follow suit, creating a revenue stream that could sustain the company for decades. Without this contract, Nexus Technologies would remain a promising but unproven startup in an increasingly crowded field. Kira's mind raced through contingency plans, backup strategies, and alternative approaches, but every path led to the same conclusion. They needed a miracle, and miracles weren't part of her business model. She had built her success on careful planning, meticulous execution, and absolute control over every variable. This situation represented the kind of chaos that kept her awake at night, the kind of unpredictable crisis that could destroy everything she had worked to build. "Keep working," she ordered, her voice betraying none of her internal turmoil. "I want updates every 30 minutes. Someone find a solution, or we'll all be looking for new jobs tomorrow." As the team returned to their desperate debugging attempts, Kira stepped outside the boardroom to collect her thoughts. The hallway was dimmer than usual, lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows across the polished floors. She could hear the quiet hum of cleaning equipment from somewhere nearby, a mundane sound that seemed absurdly normal given the crisis unfolding upstairs that for the first time in years, Kira felt truly helpless. She had always been able to force solutions through determination and intelligence, but this problem existed beyond the reach of conventional approaches. The AI system that was supposed to crown her career might instead become the weapon that destroyed it. She thought about her father, about the look in his eyes when he realized his company was finished. She had sworn never to experience that kind of vulnerability, never to put herself in a position where forces beyond her control could dictate her fate. Yet here she was, facing exactly that scenario, and all her careful planning seemed worthless against the chaotic reality of advanced artificial intelligence. The cleaning sounds grew closer, and Kira realized someone was working nearby. She turned to see a janitor methodically mopping the floor, his movements efficient and unhurried despite the late hour. There was something almost meditative about his work, a stark contrast to the frantic energy radiating from the boardroom. For a brief moment, she envied his simplicity, his ability to perform a task with clear parameters and predictable outcomes. But that moment of envy quickly transformed into something else, a reminder of how far she had risen and how far she could fall. The janitor represented everything she had worked to escape, the kind of anonymous, replaceable existence she had sworn never to accept. Whatever it took, whatever desperate measures were required, she would find a way to save Prometheus and secure the defense department contract. She just had no idea that the solution to her impossible problem was standing 10 feet away with a mop in his hands, invisible to her in the way that people beneath her notice had always been invisible. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so catastrophically high. Matthew continued his methodical cleaning routine, but his attention had been captured by the technical conversation drifting from the boardroom. Years of academic training had honed his ability to parse complex information from fragments of overheard discussion, and what he was hearing painted a clear picture of recursive logical failure in an advanced AI system. The symptoms described by the frantic programmers were hauntingly familiar, matching a theoretical problem he had studied extensively during his doctoral research. As he worked closer to the boardroom's glass walls, Matthew could see the displays, showing error logs and diagnostic outputs. His trained eye immediately recognized the patterns: cascading logic loops, exponential error multiplication, and the telltale signature of an AI system that had achieved destructive self-awareness. He had written his thesis on exactly this type of failure mode, though he had never expected to encounter it in a real-world implementation. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, requiring a specific sequence of logic interrupts combined with selective memory partition isolation. It wasn't something that could be discovered through conventional debugging approaches because it required understanding the theoretical framework underlying the AI's decision-making processes. The fix would take approximately 40 minutes to implement, assuming access to the core programming interface. Matthew paused in his cleaning, wrestling with an internal conflict he hadn't experienced in years. The professional side of his mind was itching to offer assistance, to contribute to solving a problem he understood better than anyone in that boardroom. But the practical side reminded him that janitors didn't contribute to technical solutions, and revealing his expertise would raise questions about his background that he wasn't prepared to answer. He thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, trusting her father to provide stability and security. This job might not use his education, but it paid their bills and allowed him to be present in her life. Getting involved in corporate politics and high-stakes technical crises could jeopardize the carefully balanced existence he had built for both of them. But as he listened to the increasingly desperate discussions inside the boardroom, Matthew realized that hundreds of jobs might be at stake. The custodial staff, the security guards, the administrative assistants, all the invisible people who kept Nexus Technologies functioning, would be the first casualties if the company failed. His silence might protect his own secret, but it wouldn't protect the livelihoods of his colleagues. The internal debate was interrupted when Kira Thalvin suddenly emerged from the boardroom, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the pressure she was under. She paced the hallway like a caged predator, her expensive heels clicking against the polished floor with increasing urgency. When she noticed Matthew working nearby, her expression shifted to one of barely contained irritation. "Excuse me," she sighed, her tone suggesting that his presence was an unwelcome intrusion. "I need this area cleared immediately. We're dealing with a critical situation that requires absolute privacy." Matthew nodded respectfully and began gathering his cleaning supplies. "Of course, ma'am. I'll move to another floor." But something in her demeanor, the way she dismissed him without really seeing him, triggered a response he hadn't expected. For 3 years, he had accepted invisibility as the price of his choices, but watching her treat him like an inconvenient obstacle awakened a pride he thought he had buried. "Actually," he said quietly, "I couldn't help overhearing some of the technical discussion. It sounds like you're dealing with a recursive logic cascade in your AI system." Kira stopped pacing and turned to stare at him with undisguised amazement. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "The error patterns your team described suggest that your AI has achieved a state of destructive self-reflection. It's attempting to solve its own malfunction, but each solution attempt creates new problems because the diagnostic algorithms are themselves part of the corrupted logic framework. The absurdity of receiving technical analysis from a janitor left Kira momentarily speechless. She studied Matthew's face, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke or misunderstanding. "You understand artificial intelligence architecture?" "I have some background in the field," Matthew replied carefully. Kira's initial surprise quickly transformed into something else, the cold calculation that had made her successful. If this custodial worker actually understood their problem, perhaps he could be useful. But the presumption of a janitor offering technical advice to her engineering team was almost offensive. "Some background," she repeated, her voice taking on the mocking tone she used to demolish incompetent employees. "Let me guess, you took a computer science class at community college, and now you think you understand advanced AI development?" Matthew felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice level. "I understand the specific type of failure you're experiencing because I've studied it extensively. The solution requires targeted logic interruption combined with selective memory isolation." "The solution," Kira laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My team includes PhD-level computer scientists from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. And you think you can solve what they cannot." She stepped closer, her eyes glittering with the kind of cruel amusement she reserved for people who overestimated their importance. "Tell you what, janitor. I'm feeling generous tonight, so I'll make you a deal. If you can somehow fix what my entire engineering department cannot, if you can restore our AI system before the Defense Department presentation tomorrow, I'll do something unprecedented." Kira paused, savoring the moment like a predator playing with injured prey. "I'll not only keep you employed, despite this ridiculous presumption, I'll kiss you right here in front of my entire senior staff. Because clearly, if a custodial worker can solve advanced AI problems, the normal rules of reality no longer apply." The challenge hung in the air between them, heavy with condescension and implied humiliation. Kira expected Matthew to back down immediately, to apologize for his presumption and retreat to his appropriate place in the corporate hierarchy. She had used similar tactics countless times to remind subordinates of their position and limitations, but Matthew didn't retreat. Instead, he studied her face with the same analytical precision he had once applied to complex algorithms. "And if I fail?" "When you fail," Kira corrected, "you're fired immediately. No severance, no references, nothing. You'll learn that there are consequences for wasting my time with delusions of competence." Several members of her senior team had emerged from the boardroom, drawn by the sound of their CEO's voice in the hallway. They watched with fascination and growing unease as the confrontation unfolded. Dr. Foster, in particular, looked mortified by the public spectacle, but none dared interrupt when Kira was in full predatory mode. Matthew considered the offer seriously, weighing the potential consequences against the opportunity to solve a problem that genuinely excited his intellectual curiosity. Emma would be fine for one night with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who often helped with emergency babysitting. The risk to his employment was real, but so was the possibility of preventing massive layoffs that would affect dozens of families like his own. "You're certain about the consequences?" he asked. "Fix the system and you'll kiss me in front of your staff. Fail and I'm terminated immediately." "Absolutely certain," Kira replied, her confidence unwavering. "Though I should warn you that my legal department will ensure you never work in this industry again if you damage our systems further. Sabotage is a federal crime when government contracts are involved." Matthew nodded slowly, making his decision. "I'll need access to the core AI interface and approximately 40 minutes of uninterrupted work time. The audience of senior executives exchanged bewildered glances. They were witnessing something unprecedented. A custodial worker negotiating with their notoriously ruthless CEO as if he were an equal. Some looked embarrassed by the spectacle. Others fascinated by Kira's willingness to humiliate someone so publicly. 40 minutes, Kira repeated mockingly. "My team has been working on this for 6 hours, but you need 40 minutes. This should be entertaining." She turned to address her senior staff, her voice carrying across the hallway. "Gentlemen, ladies, please gather in the boardroom. We're about to witness either a miracle or the most spectacular example of workplace delusion in corporate history. Our janitor believes he can save Prometheus." Dr. Foster stepped forward hesitantly. "Kira, perhaps we should consider." "Consider what?" She snapped. "That we might actually need custodial input on artificial intelligence development. This company didn't become successful by entertaining the fantasies of service workers." But, even as she spoke, something in Matthew's calm demeanor gave her pause. He wasn't displaying the nervous bravado she expected from someone attempting to punch above their weight. Instead, he projected quiet confidence that seemed almost professional, as if he actually believed he could deliver on his claims. "Very well," she said finally. "You have 40 minutes to prove that janitors understand AI development better than PhD computer scientists. When you fail, your termination will serve as an excellent reminder to the rest of our support staff about knowing their place." Matthew simply nodded and began walking toward the technical center where the AI core systems were housed. Behind him, he could hear Kira gathering her team to witness what she clearly expected to be his humiliation. But as he approached the complex systems that had stumped some of the brightest minds in artificial intelligence, Matthew felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: the thrill of intellectual challenge and the satisfaction of putting his expertise to meaningful use. The next 40 minutes would determine not just his employment status, but whether he could reconcile the two halves of his identity that had seemed mutually exclusive for so long. As he sat down at the core interface terminal, Matthew Sindrell, the janitor, began the process of becoming Dr. Matthew Sindrell once again. even if only for the length of time it took to save a company and prove that intelligence existed in unexpected places. Matthew settled into the chair at the primary AI interface terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he surveyed the cascade of error messages flooding the multiple monitors. The Prometheus system was indeed trapped in a recursive logic loop, but the specific implementation was more elegant than he had expected. Someone had created an AI architecture that was simultaneously brilliant and fatally flawed, like a mathematical proof that was perfect except for a single incorrect assumption that invalidated the entire framework. Behind him, Kira and her senior team had arranged themselves in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from skeptical amusement to outright hostility. Dr. Foster looked particularly uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that allowing a custodial worker access to their most sensitive systems violated every protocol they had established. But Kira's authority was absolute, and her desire to publicly humiliate Matthew overrode any technical concerns. 40 minutes starting now, Kira announced, checking her platinum watch with theatrical precision. Though I suspect we'll know much sooner whether our janitor possesses miraculous AI expertise or simply an overactive imagination. Matthew ignored the commentary and began his diagnostic routine, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Years of academic research had taught him to compartmentalize external distractions when working on complex problems, and the hostile audience behind him faded into background noise as he focused on the code structure before him. The first step was understanding exactly how the recursive loop had formed. AI systems didn't simply break randomly. They followed logical pathways that led to predictable failure modes. By tracing the error cascades backward through the system logs, Matthew could identify the precise moment when Prometheus had begun its destructive self-examination. Interesting, he murmured, his voice carrying the kind of professional fascination that surprised his audience. The initial trigger was a quantum state uncertainty in the decision matrix. The eye encountered a logical paradox it couldn't resolve, and began questioning its own foundational assumptions. Dr. Cruz leaned forward involuntarily. That's impossible. Prometheus doesn't have quantum processing capabilities. The architecture is entirely classical computation. Matthew continued typing, without turning around. The quantum uncertainty isn't in the hardware, it's in the logical framework. Someone programmed Prometheus to optimize for contradictory objectives simultaneously. When it encounters a situation where achieving one goal prevents achieving another, it enters a state of logical superposition that mimics quantum uncertainty. The technical accuracy of his explanation sent a chill through the assembled team. This wasn't lucky guessing or superficial knowledge gleaned from popular science articles. Matthew was demonstrating deep understanding of both AI architecture and quantum logic theory, fields that required years of advanced study to master. Who programmed those contradictory objectives? Dr. Foster asked, his voice tight with professional concern. Based on the code structure, I'd say this was deliberate, Matthew replied, pulling up sections of the core programming on his secondary monitor. Someone wanted to create an AI that could handle complex moral and ethical decisions by forcing it to weigh competing values. It's actually quite sophisticated, but the implementation has a fatal flaw. Kira stepped closer to the monitors, her earlier mockery replaced by sharp attention. What kind of flaw? The system was designed to handle ethical dilemmas by temporarily suspending logical consistency. But there's no mechanism for restoring consistency afterward. It's like teaching someone to question everything, then being surprised when they start questioning the validity of questioning itself. Matthew's explanation was accompanied by rapid navigation through the AI's code structure, highlighting specific algorithms and decision trees with the confidence of someone who had authored similar systems. His audience watched in growing amazement as he dissected years of complex programming work in minutes, identifying design patterns and architectural choices that revealed intimate familiarity with advanced AI development. The solution is elegant, he continued, opening a new programming interface. We need to create a logical anchor point that the AI can return to after processing ethical paradoxes. Think of it as providing a philosophical foundation that remains stable even when surface-level decision-making becomes uncertain. Dr. Foster's professional instincts overcame his bewilderment. That's theoretically sound, but implementing such a system would require restructuring the entire ethical reasoning module. That's months of work, possibly years. Not if you approach it correctly, Matthew replied, beginning to type new code with remarkable speed. Instead of restructuring the existing logic, we create a parallel processing thread that monitors for recursive loops and provides intervention when necessary. The ethical reasoning system remains intact, but gains a safeguard against self-destructive introspection. As lines of code appeared on the screen, the senior programmers recognized something that left them speechless. This wasn't amateur work or lucky improvisation. Matthew was writing professional-grade AI code with the kind of elegant efficiency that marked true expertise. His variable naming conventions, algorithm optimization techniques, and structural approaches all bore the hallmarks of advanced academic research. Where did you learn to code like this? Dr. Cruz whispered, her voice filled with professional awe. Matthew paused in his typing, considering how much to reveal. MIT. I completed my PhD in artificial intelligence with a focus on ethical decision-making systems. My thesis was on preventing recursive logic cascades in advanced AI architectures. The silence that followed was profound. Kira felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as the comfortable assumptions she had made about social hierarchies and professional competence crumbled. A PhD from MIT represented more prestigious credentials than most of her senior team possessed. Yet this man had been cleaning their offices for months while they struggled with problems he could solve in his sleep. Dr. Matthew Sindrel, Dr. Foster said slowly, recognition dawning in his voice. You wrote the foundational papers on AI ethical paradox resolution. Your work is required reading in every advanced AI program in the country. That was a long time ago, Matthew replied. Returning his attention to the code, I'm just Matthew now, the janitor who happens to understand your AI system. But the implications of his revelation were staggering. Dr. Matthew Sindrel had been considered one of the most promising AI researchers of his generation before mysteriously disappearing from academic circles 3 years earlier. His papers on machine consciousness and ethical reasoning had influenced every major AI development project in the past decade, including the theoretical framework underlying Prometheus itself. Kira stared at the man she had just finished humiliating, trying to reconcile the janitor she had dismissed with the legendary researcher whose work had shaped her company's technology. Why are you working as custodial staff? With your credentials, you could have any position in the industry. Matthew's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard as he continued implementing his solution. Because sometimes life forces you to choose between professional success and personal responsibility. I chose responsibility. Responsibility to whom? To my daughter. Emma needed a father who would be present in her life, not someone disappearing into research labs for 18 hours a day. This job allows me to support her while being the parent she deserves. The simplicity of his explanation only made it more powerful. Here was someone who had voluntarily walked away from prestige and financial success to prioritize family obligations, a concept so foreign to Kira's worldview that she struggled to comprehend it. In her experience, people fought desperately to climb higher in professional hierarchies. They didn't voluntarily descend them for sentimental reasons. You gave up everything for a personal relationship, she asked, her voice betraying her confusion. I gave up nothing that mattered, Matthew corrected. I gained everything that did. As he spoke, his solution began taking shape on the screen. The code was remarkably concise, a testament to his deep understanding of the underlying systems. Rather than brute force patches or complex workarounds, he was implementing elegant logical structures that addressed the root cause of Prometheus's failure while preserving all its advanced capabilities. Fascinating approach, Dr. Foster admitted. Studying the emerging code structure, you're essentially creating an artificial philosophical framework that provides logical stability without constraining ethical reasoning. I've never seen anything like it. The concept comes from ancient Greek philosophy, Matthew explained, adding the final components of his solution. Aristotle's work on practical wisdom and the golden mean. Sometimes the most advanced AI problems require solutions that predate computers by several thousand years. 27 minutes after beginning, Matthew entered the final command sequence and initiated the system restart. The monitors around them went dark for a moment before slowly coming back online, this time displaying normal operational parameters instead of cascading error messages. Prometheus was not only functional again, but operating at optimal efficiency levels. "System restored," Matthew announced quietly. "Prometheus is online and ready for your Defense Department presentation." The boardroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and bewildered applause, but Kira remained silent, staring at the man who had just accomplished something her entire engineering department had deemed impossible. Everything she thought she understood about competence, credentials, and social hierarchies had been challenged in the span of half an hour. Dr. Matthew Sindrell had been hiding in plain sight for months, cleaning the offices of people whose expertise couldn't match his own. The humiliation she had intended to inflict on him had instead revealed the depth of her own prejudices and assumptions. She had been prepared to mock a janitor. Instead, she found herself facing one of the most respected AI researchers in the world. As the celebration continued around them, Kira realized that she now owed this remarkable man something she had never given anyone: a public acknowledgement of his worth and an admission of her own mistakes. The kiss she had promised as mockery now loomed before her as a completely different kind of challenge, one that would force her to confront everything she believed about power, prestige, and the true nature of human value. The Prometheus AI hummed back to life with the quiet efficiency of a well-tuned machine, its diagnostic displays showing optimal parameters across all systems. Status indicators that had been flashing angry red for hours now glowed steady green, and the error cascades that had consumed the previous 6 hours of desperate debugging simply disappeared. In the space of 27 minutes, Matthew had accomplished what an entire team of PhD-level engineers had deemed impossible. The boardroom fell into stunned silence as the implications of his success settled over the assembled executives. Dr. Foster moved to the primary monitoring station, running diagnostic after diagnostic, each one confirming that Prometheus was not only functional but operating at peak efficiency. The AI's response times were actually improved from its pre-crash state, suggesting that Matthew's intervention had optimized performance while solving the recursive logic problem. "This is remarkable," Dr. Cruz whispered, staring at the clean code structure Matthew had implemented. "The philosophical anchor framework is elegant beyond anything I've seen. It's like giving the AI a conscience without constraining its reasoning capabilities." Dr. Foster nodded in agreement, his professional admiration overcoming his bewilderment at the source of the solution. "The ethical reasoning module is more sophisticated now than it was before the crash. Dr. Sindrell hasn't just fixed Prometheus, he's improved it." But while the technical team celebrated their restored AI system, Kira found herself facing a more complex challenge. She had made a public promise in front of her senior staff, wagering her dignity against what she had assumed was impossible. The kiss she had offered as mockery now loomed before her as a debt of honor that would require her to publicly acknowledge her misjudgment. More unsettling than the prospect of public humiliation was the growing realization that everything she thought she understood about social hierarchies and professional competence had been fundamentally wrong. For months, she had walked past one of the world's leading AI experts without recognizing him, dismissing him as invisible service staff, while he quietly cleaned the offices of people whose expertise couldn't match his own. "Well," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil in her chest, "it appears our janitor has succeeded where my engineering team could not." Matthew turned from the terminal where he had been running final system checks, his expression calm and professional. "Prometheus is fully operational and ready for your Defense Department presentation. The ethical reasoning enhancement should actually improve performance during complex scenario testing." "About my promise," Kira began, then stopped, struggling with words that felt foreign on her tongue. Public apologies were not part of her vocabulary, and admitting error in front of subordinates violated every principle of leadership she had learned. "That won't be necessary," Matthew replied quietly. "The system is fixed, which was the important thing. Your offer was made under duress during a crisis situation." His gracious dismissal of her debt somehow made it more difficult to ignore. Kira had built her reputation on absolute adherence to her word, on being someone whose promises could be trusted implicitly. Backing down now, even from an obligation she regretted making, would undermine the foundation of her professional credibility. "A deal is a deal," she said, stepping closer to where he stood beside the AI terminal. "I promised that if you could fix Prometheus, I would kiss you in front of my staff. You've more than fulfilled your part of the agreement." The assembled executives watched with fascination and growing discomfort as their notoriously controlled CEO prepared to honor a promise that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Some looked embarrassed by the public spectacle, others intrigued by this unprecedented display of vulnerability from someone known for never showing weakness. Matthew studied her face, recognizing the internal struggle she was experiencing. "You offered that kiss as an insult, as a way to highlight the absurdity of someone like me helping someone like you. Are you certain you want to honor it for the same reasons?" His question forced Kira to confront the true nature of her motivations. The kiss she had promised as mockery would now serve as public acknowledgement that her assumptions about worth and competence had been completely wrong. It would be a visible symbol of her fallibility, broadcast to the senior staff who looked to her for unwavering leadership. "I'm certain," she replied, though her voice carried uncertainty she rarely allowed others to hear. "You've earned it, Dr. Sindrel. Your expertise saved this company tonight." She stepped closer, close enough to see the quiet dignity in his eyes, the absence of triumph or mockery, despite having every right to both. When she had imagined this moment during her earlier taunting, she had pictured herself condescending to someone beneath her station. Instead, she found herself looking up at someone whose professional accomplishments dwarfed her own, whose sacrifice of personal ambition for family responsibility represented a kind of strength she had never considered. Kiss, when it came, was brief and professional, but it carried weight that extended far beyond the physical contact. As Kira's lips met Matthew's cheek, she felt something shift in her understanding of power and worthiness. This wasn't the humiliation of a CEO forced to acknowledge service staff. It was the humbling of someone who had learned that true competence existed independent of job titles and social status. When she stepped back, the boardroom remained silent, but the silence carried different energy than before. What had begun as anticipated spectacle had transformed into something more complex, a moment of recognition between two people who had discovered that their assumptions about each other were fundamentally flawed. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying more meaning than their surface simplicity suggested. Matthew nodded, then began gathering the tools he had used to solve the AI crisis. "I should return to my regular duties." The third floor, still. Needs to be cleaned before morning. The casual transition back to custodial responsibilities jarred everyone present. They had just witnessed someone solve a problem that had stumped their best minds, only to watch him return to mopping floors as if nothing significant had happened. The cognitive dissonance was profound. How could someone with such extraordinary capabilities accept such ordinary employment? Wait, Dr. Foster interjected. You can't possibly continue working as custodial staff. With your expertise, we could offer you a senior position in our AI development division. The compensation alone would be life-changing. Matthew paused in his preparations to leave, considering the offer seriously. What would the schedule look like? Standard executive hours. Usually 10 to 12 hours daily, sometimes more during critical projects. Occasional travel for conferences and client presentations. The position would require significant time investment, but the professional rewards would be substantial. And Emma? Emma? My daughter, she's 8 years old. Who would pick her up from school? Who would help with homework and make dinner? Who would read bedtime stories and be there when she has nightmares about her mother? The questions highlighted a fundamental disconnect between the professional opportunities being offered and the personal responsibilities that truly governed Matthew's decisions. The senior executives exchanged glances, recognizing that they were encountering value system completely foreign to their experience. Dr. Cruz attempted a solution. We could provide childcare support, perhaps a nanny or after-school program. Many of our executives use such services to manage family obligations. Matthew shook his head gently. Emma doesn't need paid supervision. She needs her father. She's already lost one parent. I won't make her lose another to career ambition. But your talents are being wasted, Dr. Foster insisted. You could contribute to projects that advance the entire field of artificial intelligence. Your work could benefit millions of people. My work now benefits one person who matters more than millions of strangers, Matthew replied. Emma is my priority, and custodial work allows me to be the father she needs, while still contributing something useful to society. Kira listened to this exchange with growing fascination and discomfort. She was witnessing someone voluntarily reject everything she had spent her adult life pursuing: professional recognition, financial success, and the opportunity to maximize their potential. Yet Matthew's reasoning was internally consistent and even admirable, if utterly incomprehensible from her perspective. You're choosing limitation over achievement, she said, trying to understand his motivations. How can someone with your capabilities accept such constraints? Matthew looked at her with patient kindness, recognizing that her question came from genuine confusion rather than mockery. I'm choosing love over achievement. The constraints you see are freedoms to me. Freedom to be present in my daughter's life. Freedom from the pressure to constantly prove my worth through professional accomplishments. Freedom to find meaning in simple daily tasks rather than grand career ambitions. But don't you miss it? The intellectual challenge, the recognition, the opportunity to push the boundaries of human knowledge. I miss aspects of my former life, Matthew admitted. But I've gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what matters most. Tonight was intellectually satisfying, but tomorrow Emma will have a science project that needs help, and that will be more important to me than any AI breakthrough. As he spoke, Kira began to recognize that she was encountering a completely different definition of success, one that measured achievement in terms of relationships and personal fulfillment rather than professional advancement and social status. It was a perspective that challenged every assumption she had made about ambition and worth. I should go, Matthew said, checking his watch. Emma will be waking up in a few hours, and I want to be there to make her breakfast. He walked toward the door with the same quiet dignity he had displayed throughout the evening, leaving behind a group of executives who were struggling to process what they had witnessed. The man who had just saved their company was returning to work that paid a fraction of what he was worth. Motivated by priorities they found difficult to comprehend, as the boardroom door closed behind him, Kira found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. She had just met someone who possessed everything she thought she wanted: intelligence, competence, respect, while valuing everything she had convinced herself didn't matter. The collision between his worldview and hers had left her questioning assumptions she had never thought to examine, and wondering whether the life she had built was actually the life she wanted to live. Defense Department Presentation 12. Hours later was a triumph that exceeded even Kira's ambitious expectations. Prometheus performed flawlessly, demonstrating capabilities that left the military officials speechless with admiration. The AI's enhanced ethical reasoning framework, implemented by Matthew during the crisis, proved to be exactly what the Department of Defense had been seeking: artificial intelligence that could make complex moral decisions without losing sight of fundamental human values. General Patricia Morrison, the lead evaluator, had been particularly impressed by Prometheus's ability to navigate scenario after scenario, involving competing ethical priorities. "This is revolutionary," she had told Kira after the final demonstration. "We've tested dozens of AI systems, but none have shown this level of sophisticated moral reasoning. Whatever breakthrough you achieved in your ethical framework development, it's going to change how we approach autonomous decision-making in critical situations." The $800 million contract was signed that afternoon, along with a preliminary agreement for additional projects worth potentially $2 billion over the next decade. Nexus Technologies had secured its position as the government's premier AI development partner, validating everything Kira had worked to build over the past 5 years. But as she stood in her office that evening, looking out at the city lights, while her team celebrated in the conference room below, Kira found herself thinking not about the financial triumph or the professional validation, but about the man who had made it all possible. The janitor who wasn't really a janitor, whose quiet competence had saved her company while asking for nothing in return. The story of Matthew's intervention had spread through Nexus Technologies like wildfire, though the details had become increasingly distorted with each retelling. Some versions painted him as a mysterious genius who had been secretly observing their work for months. Others suggested he was actually a corporate spy sent by competitors to evaluate their security protocols. The truth that Dr. Matthew Sindrel had been hiding in plain sight, choosing custodial work to prioritize his daughter's needs, was somehow both simpler and more extraordinary than any of the rumors. Dr. Foster had spent the morning researching Matthew's academic background, uncovering a body of research that had influenced virtually every major AI development project of the past decade. "He cited in our own foundational documentation," Foster had reported to Kira with something approaching awe. "The ethical reasoning framework we've been trying to perfect for 5 years is based on theoretical groundwork he laid in his doctoral thesis. We've been attempting to build on his ideas without realizing the original architect was cleaning our offices every night." The revelation had prompted a company-wide reassessment of assumptions about competence and credentials. If someone of Matthew's stature could be overlooked simply because he wore a custodial uniform, what other talent might they be missing due to their prejudices about social status and conventional career paths? The question was uncomfortable because it suggested that their hiring practices and corporate culture might be fundamentally flawed. Kira had found herself paying attention to service staff in ways she never had before, actually seeing the security guards and maintenance workers who kept Nexus Technologies functioning. She noticed their efficiency, their problem-solving abilities, their quiet pride in work that she had previously considered beneath notice. The custodial supervisor, Mrs. Alina Rodriguez, turned out to have a master's degree in environmental engineering. The night security chief, James Patterson, was a former police detective who had left law enforcement to spend more time with his teenage sons. Each discovery reinforced the same uncomfortable lesson: Competence and intelligence existed throughout their organization, but her tunnel vision had prevented her from recognizing it. She had been so focused on credentials and status markers that she had failed to see the actual capabilities of the people around her. The transformation in how others viewed Matthew was equally dramatic. Word of his expertise had reached the programming staff, who began approaching him during his shifts with technical questions they couldn't solve. Rather than dismissing their requests, Matthew would listen carefully to their problems and often provide insights that saved hours of debugging work. His explanations were patient and educational, transforming encounters into learning opportunities rather than simple problem-solving sessions. He's like having a personal AI consultant available all night, one junior programmer had confided to Dr. Cruz. I've learned more about machine learning architecture in the past week than I did in my entire graduate program. And he explains things in ways that actually make sense instead of just showing off how smart he is. The comment had stunned Kira more than she cared to admit, highlighting the contrast between Matthew's generous teaching style and her own tendency to use superior knowledge as a weapon for maintaining dominance. She had built her reputation on being the smartest person in any room, but Matthew demonstrated intelligence without arrogance, expertise without condescension. Dr. Foster had formally requested permission to offer Matthew a consulting position. That would allow him to maintain his current schedule while contributing to their AI development projects. We could structure it around his custodial hours, Foster had proposed. He could review our code during his breaks, provide architectural guidance when we encounter complex problems, maybe lead some educational sessions for the junior staff. His insights are too valuable to waste. But when the offer was presented to Matthew, he had politely declined. I appreciate the recognition, he had said, but my arrangement works because it's simple. Adding consulting responsibilities would complicate things in ways that might interfere with my primary job, being Emma's father. His continued refusal to prioritize professional advancement over family obligations had become a source of fascination and frustration throughout the company. Kira found herself spending increasing amounts of time thinking about his choices, trying to understand a value system that seemed to invert everything she had been taught about ambition and success. She had begun altering her own schedule to encounter him during his shifts, initially under the pretense of checking on security protocols or reviewing late operational procedures. But their conversations gradually evolved beyond professional topics, touching on philosophy, technology, and the fundamental questions of what made life meaningful. Don't you ever regret it? She had asked him one night as he cleaned the break room on her floor. Giving up the recognition, the opportunity to shape the future of artificial intelligence, the chance to leave a lasting mark on human knowledge? Matthew had paused in his work, considering the question seriously. I've left the only mark that matters to me, he had replied. Every night when I come home, Emma runs to the door to hug me. She tells me about her day, asks for help with homework, wants me to read her favorite story before bed. In 20 years, the AI systems I might have developed will be obsolete, but the relationship I'm building with my daughter will still be the foundation of who she becomes. But your potential impact could benefit millions of people. My actual impact benefits one person who matters more to me than millions of strangers. I'm not against helping others. Tonight proved that, but I won't sacrifice Emma's childhood for hypothetical contributions to humanity. His certainty about priorities that seemed backwards to her had become increasingly unsettling. Kira had spent her adult life accumulating achievements that impressed strangers while maintaining no meaningful personal relationships. Matthew had deliberately chosen obscurity to nurture a single relationship that provided him with satisfaction she couldn't comprehend. The contrast forced her to confront questions she had been avoiding for years. What was the point of professional success if it came at the cost of personal fulfillment? Why had she assumed that recognition from peers she barely knew was more valuable than genuine connection with people who actually mattered? When had she decided that proving her worth to the world was more important than having someone in the world who loved her regardless of her achievements? As she stood in her pristine office, surrounded by awards that suddenly felt hollow, Kira realized that Matthew Sindrel represented everything she had convinced herself she didn't want: contentment over ambition, relationship over recognition, simplicity over complexity. Yet watching him navigate his chosen life with quiet dignity had awakened longings she thought she had successfully buried years ago. The most unsettling realization was that her growing fascination with Matthew wasn't purely professional. She found herself looking forward to their late-night conversations, appreciating his gentle humor and genuine kindness in ways that had nothing to do with his technical expertise. For someone who had spent years avoiding emotional entanglements, she was developing feelings that threatened to complicate everything she thought she understood about herself. The irony was profound. The man who had saved her company was also challenging her entire worldview, forcing her to question whether the life she had built was actually worth living. And despite every instinct warning her against vulnerability, Kira found herself wanting to understand not just how Matthew solved AI problems, but how he had solved the problem of finding meaning in a world that seemed designed to disappoint anyone brave enough to hope for authentic connection. 3 weeks after the Prometheus crisis, Kira found herself doing something unprecedented, leaving the office early on a Friday afternoon. Her stated reason was a facilities inspection, but the truth was more complicated. She had learned that Matthew's shift started at 4 p.m. on Fridays to accommodate Emma's early dismissal from school, and she wanted to see him in his role as a father rather than just as the genius custodian who had saved her company. She waited in the parking garage, feeling slightly ridiculous as she pretended to review documents on her tablet while watching for Matthew's beat-up Honda Civic when he arrived with Emma in the passenger seat. Kira experienced something she hadn't felt in years: curiosity about someone else's private world that had nothing to do with business advantage. Emma Sindrel was unmistakably her father's daughter, with the same intelligent eyes and thoughtful expression that made Matthew so compelling. But where his intelligence manifested as quiet competence, hers bubbled over with enthusiastic curiosity about everything around her. As they walked toward the building entrance, Kira could hear Emma chattering excitedly about a robotics project she was working on for the school science fair. And then, if I program the sensors correctly, it should be able to navigate around obstacles without any human input, Emma was explaining with 8-year-old authority. Like how humans don't have to think about stepping over things, they just do it automatically. That's impressive reasoning, Matthew replied, his voice carrying the kind of parental pride that was unmistakable. How did you figure out the programming logic? I watched how you debug problems at home. You always start with the simplest possible cause and work your way up to more complex explanations. So I programmed the robot to check for big obstacles first, then smaller ones, then really tiny ones. Kira found herself following them at a discreet distance, fascinated by the easy intimacy between father and daughter. Emma clearly viewed Matthew as her intellectual equal, discussing complex concepts with the assumption that he would understand and engage with her ideas. In return, he treated her thoughts with the same seriousness he might give to a colleague's technical proposal. "Where are you planning to work on the project today?" he asked as they entered the building. "In the break room, if that's okay." "I brought my laptop and all the components. Mrs. Rodriguez said I could use the big table as long as I clean up afterward." "Mrs. Rodriguez is the custodial supervisor," Matthew explained, noticing Kira's presence for the first time. "She's been incredibly kind about letting Emma study here during my shifts. Emma, I'd like you to meet Miss Thalvin, the CEO of this company." Emma turned to study Kira with frank curiosity, displaying none of the nervousness most people showed. When meeting her, "You're the lady who challenged Daddy to fix the broken computer," she said matter-of-factly. "He told me about it. That was smart of you to recognize that he could help, even though he doesn't have the official job title." The innocent observation caught Kira off guard. From Emma's perspective, the humiliating challenge had been a moment of insight rather than prejudice, a recognition of hidden competence rather than an attempt at public mockery. The 8-year-old's interpretation cast the incident in a completely different light. "Your father is very talented," Kira replied carefully. "I'm impressed by his expertise. He's the smartest person I know," Emma said with absolute certainty. "But he's also the kindest, which is more important. Smart people aren't always kind, but Daddy is both." The comment carried unconscious wisdom that struck Kira with unexpected force. In her experience, intelligence and kindness were often inversely related. The smartest people she knew used their capabilities as weapons for maintaining advantage over others. Matthew represented a combination she had rarely encountered: brilliance coupled with genuine compassion. "What kind of robotics project are you working on?" Kira asked, genuinely curious. Emma's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I'm building a helper robot for elderly people. It can bring them medicine, remind them to eat, and call for help if they fall down. My grandmother lives in a nursing home, and I noticed that the staff is really busy, so I thought a robot could help with simple tasks." "That's very thoughtful. How did you learn about robotics programming?" "Daddy teaches me. He says programming is just another language for talking to machines. And once you understand the grammar, you can teach them to do almost anything. We work on projects together after dinner." Kira glanced at Matthew, who looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. "It's just basic programming concepts," he said modestly. "Emma has a natural aptitude for logical thinking." "Could I see your project?" Kira asked Emma, surprising herself with the request. She couldn't remember the last time she had shown genuine interest in a student's work, but something about Emma's combination of technical ambition and social conscience was compelling. Emma's excitement was infectious as she led them to the soon break room where her robotics components were spread across the table like the remnants of a disassembled toy store. But as Kira examined the project more closely, she realized that this was far more sophisticated than typical elementary school science work. Emma had created a functional prototype with sensor arrays, programmed responses, and elegant solutions to complex engineering problems. "This is remarkable," Kira said, her professional admiration overriding social politeness. "The sensor integration alone represents advanced programming concepts. How long have you been working on this?" "About 3 months," Emma replied. "Daddy helps me when I get stuck, but he makes me figure out the solutions myself. He says learning happens when you solve problems, not when someone else solves them for you." "Show Ms. Thalvin how the obstacle avoidance works," Matthew suggested. Emma activated her robot and placed several objects in its path. The small machine navigated around them with impressive efficiency, adjusting its route in real time as new obstacles were introduced. The programming was elegant and functional, demonstrating understanding of concepts that many high school students would find challenging. "The coolest part is the learning algorithm," Emma continued. "Each time it encounters a new type of obstacle, it remembers the solution and applies it to similar situations later. So it gets smarter every time it runs." Kira stared at the robot, then at Emma, then at Matthew. "She's implemented machine learning protocols in an elementary school science project?" "Basic ones," Matthew replied. But Emma grasped the theoretical framework surprisingly quickly. She wanted to understand how robots could get better at their jobs without human intervention. "Like how people learn from experience," Emma added. "I figured robots should be able to do the same thing, just faster." For the next hour, Kira found herself genuinely engaged with Emma's project, asking technical questions and offering suggestions for improvements. The 8-year-old responded to her input with enthusiasm. incorporating new ideas into her design and explaining her reasoning with startling clarity. What struck Kira most profoundly was the dynamic between father and daughter. Matthew participated in their discussion as a gentle guide rather than an authority figure, encouraging Emma to explain her thinking while subtly steering her toward better solutions. He clearly took pride in her accomplishments, but his pride was focused on her learning process rather than just the final results. How do you balance work and family time? Kira asked during a break in the technical discussion. The question came out more personally than she had intended, revealing her own struggles with time management and relationships. I don't balance them, Matthew replied. I integrate them. Emma comes with me to work because this job allows it. We work on projects together because learning happens everywhere, not just in classrooms. Instead of trying to separate different parts of my life, I've created a life where they support each other. But don't you ever want time for yourself? Personal interests separate from parenting responsibilities? Emma is my personal interest. Watching her discover how the world works, helping her develop her capabilities, being present for her questions and insights, that's the most engaging hobby I've ever had. Other interests feel trivial compared to the privilege of watching someone remarkable grow into their potential. His answer revealed a perspective on parenthood that was completely foreign to Kira's experience. In her observation, most successful people treated family obligations as constraints on their real interests, necessary compromises that limited their ability to pursue meaningful work. Matthew had somehow reversed that equation, finding his most meaningful work in family relationships. What about your scientific interests? Don't you miss contributing to research that could advance human knowledge? I'm conducting the most important research of my life, Matthew replied, watching Emma troubleshoot a sensor calibration problem. I'm studying how curiosity develops, how learning happens, how someone becomes the kind of person who uses their capabilities to help others. The data I'm collecting about human development is more valuable to me than any AI breakthrough. As the evening progressed, Kira found herself reluctant to leave, despite having no legitimate business reason to remain. She was witnessing something she had never experienced, a family dynamic based on mutual respect, shared learning, and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. There was no power struggle, no competition for attention, no underlying tension about unmet expectations. When Emma finished her work session and began packing her robotics components, she turned to Kira with characteristic directness. Would you like to come to my science fair next week? It's on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Daddy will be there, and I think you'd enjoy seeing all the projects. The invitation was casual and inclusive, carrying no hidden agenda or expectation of special treatment. Emma simply wanted to share something she was proud of with someone who had shown genuine interest in her work. I would be honored to attend, Kira replied, meaning it more than she had expected. Your project deserves recognition. As they prepared to leave, Matthew approached her privately. Thank you for taking interest in Emma's work. It means a lot to her when adults treat her ideas seriously. Her ideas deserve serious attention. She's developing capabilities that most adults lack. She's developing something more important than technical capabilities, Matthew replied. She's learning that knowledge should be used to help others. That intelligence is only valuable when it's coupled with compassion. Those lessons will matter more than any programming skills. Walking to her car later, Kira reflected on the evening with confusion and unexpected longing. She had intended to observe Matthew's family life out of curiosity, but instead had encountered a way of living that challenged every assumption she had made about success, fulfillment, and the purpose of human relationships. For the first time in her adult life, she found herself wanting something she couldn't achieve through determination and strategic planning, the kind of authentic connection that seemed to come naturally to the man who had saved her company and was now impossibly beginning to capture her heart. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on Monday morning. interrupting Kira's usual pre-dawn workout routine. Vincent Ashworth's name on her phone screen triggered an immediate spike of anxiety. The chairman of Nexus Technologies' board of directors only called when someone's career was in jeopardy. "Kira, we need to talk." His voice carried the kind of controlled displeasure that preceded corporate executions. "My office 1 hour. And bring explanations for some very interesting reports I've been receiving about your recent management decisions." The line went dead before she could respond, leaving Kira to contemplate what interesting reports might mean while she prepared for what felt like professional combat. Vincent Ashworth was old guard corporate aristocracy, someone who believed that social hierarchies existed for important reasons and that mixing business with personal sentiment was the fastest way to destroy shareholder value. An hour later, Kira sat across from Vincent in his intimidating corner office, where original oil paintings and antique furniture created an atmosphere of inherited authority. At 62, Vincent possessed the kind of understated power that came from controlling billions of dollars in investment capital and the careers of everyone who depended on it. "Explain to me," Vincent began without preamble, "why my security team is reporting that you've been spending significant after-hours time with custodial staff. Specifically, with someone named Matthew Sindrel, who apparently has been granted unprecedented access to our most sensitive AI systems." Kira felt her stomach tighten, but maintained her composure. "Dr. Sindrel assisted with a critical system failure that threatened our Defense Department contract. His intervention was essential to our success." "Dr. Sindrel?" Vincent's eyebrows rose with theatrical surprise. "Our janitor is a doctor now? How convenient. And I suppose this explains why you've been observed having extended personal conversations with said janitor, including attending what appeared to be a social gathering. With his family?" "His family?" The surveillance revelation sent a chill through Kira's chest. She had been careful about maintaining professional boundaries during their interactions, but apparently not careful enough to avoid detection by corporate security systems designed to monitor executive behavior for potential liability issues. "I attended his daughter's science fair as a representative of Nexus Technologies," she replied, technically accurate but misleading. "The company benefits from maintaining positive relationships with employee families." Vincent's laugh was cold and knowing. "Kira, I've known you for 8 years. You've never attended a company picnic, let alone an employee's family event. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is standard corporate outreach." He leaned forward, his expression shifting from amusement to warning. "More importantly, I've had our research team investigate this mysterious Dr. Sindrel. Imagine my surprise to discover that he's Dr. Matthew Sindrel, the former MIT researcher who disappeared from academic circles 3 years ago. The same doctor, Matthew Sindrel, whose theoretical work forms the foundation of our Prometheus AI system. Which is exactly why his input was so valuable during the crisis," Kira said, realizing too late that she was confirming rather than denying the connection. "His input was valuable, I'll grant you that. But his continued employment as custodial staff while possessing expertise that could benefit our competitors represents a security risk we cannot tolerate." Vincent stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city while he delivered what Kira recognized as a prepared speech. "I've spoken with our legal department about Dr. Sindrel's situation. His employment contract includes standard confidentiality agreements, but nothing that would prevent him from taking his knowledge elsewhere. Given his background and his recent exposure to our most advanced systems, he represents a significant liability." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Dr. Sindrel poses a threat to our intellectual property that must be addressed immediately. Either he joins our development team in a position commensurate with his expertise, where he can be properly monitored and legally bound, or his employment with Nexus Technologies ends today." Kira felt the trap closing around both her and Matthew. Vincent was presenting options that sounded reasonable, but were designed to force exactly the kind of choice that would destroy the life Matthew had carefully built for himself and Emma. "He's already declined offers to join our development team," she said. "His current position allows him to maintain the schedule his family needs." "Then he's made his choice," Vincent replied with satisfaction. "Effective immediately, Dr. Sindrill's access to our facilities is revoked. Security will escort him from the building today, and our legal team will ensure he understands the consequences of sharing any proprietary information he may have gained during his employment. You can't fire him for refusing a promotion he doesn't want. I'm not firing him for refusing promotion. I'm terminating his employment because his continued presence in a custodial role while possessing advanced AI expertise represents an unacceptable security risk. Our insurance company has already flagged this as a potential liability issue." Vincent returned to his desk, his expression shifting from professional to personal. "But that's not really what this is about, is it, Kira? This is about your inappropriate fascination with someone you perceive as beneath your social station. I've seen this before: successful women who romanticize working-class authenticity as an antidote to the pressures of leadership." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. "My personal interactions with Dr. Sindrill are irrelevant to business operations. Everything about your behavior is relevant to business operations when you're the CEO. Your judgment, your priorities, your emotional stability, all of these directly impact shareholder value and company performance." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his tone becoming almost paternal. "I've watched you build this company into something remarkable through dedication and ruthless focus. But lately, your attention has been divided. You're spending time on custodial staff issues instead of strategic planning. You're attending elementary school science fairs instead of investor meetings. You're developing personal attachments that compromise your professional objectivity. One science fair hardly represents compromised judgment. It represents a pattern of behavior that concerns me deeply. You've always been my most reliable executive precisely because you understood that personal relationships were distractions from the work that really mattered. Now you're acting like sentiment is more important than success." Kira realized that Vincent was offering her a choice between the life she had built and the connection she was developing with Matthew and Emma. The corporate world she had conquered would not tolerate divided loyalties or complicated emotions that might interfere with quarterly performance metrics. "Dr. Sindrill will be terminated today," Vincent continued. "The only question is whether you're going to let this temporary infatuation damage your own position as well. I need to know that you understand where your priorities lie. And if I disagree with your assessment, then you'll discover that CEO positions are not guaranteed, regardless of past performance. The board expects leadership that puts shareholder interests above personal feelings. If you can't provide that kind of leadership, we'll find someone who can." The threat was explicit and devastating. Vincent was forcing her to choose between job security and defending someone who had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully explain. The rational choice was obvious. Matthew would find other employment, Emma would adapt to new circumstances, and Kira would continue building the successful career that had always been her primary source of identity. But as she sat in Vincent's office surrounded by symbols of corporate power that suddenly felt hollow, Kira realized that the rational choice might not be the right choice. Matthew had shown her a different way of measuring success, one that prioritized authentic relationships over professional advancement. Emma had demonstrated that curiosity and kindness could coexist with intelligence and ambition. "I need time to consider your position," she said finally. "You have until end of business today. Dr. Sindrill's termination will be processed this afternoon, unless you can provide compelling business reasons for retaining someone whose expertise makes him a security liability in his current role." As Kira left Vincent's office, she understood that she was facing the same kind of choice that Matthew had made 3 years earlier, between professional success and personal values, between advancement and authenticity, between the life others expected her to live and the life she was beginning to want for herself. The decision would determine not just Matthew's employment, but whether she had the courage to choose connection over control, love over achievement, and the uncertain rewards of vulnerability over the familiar safety of emotional isolation. Kira spent the rest of the morning in her office, staring at financial reports she couldn't focus on while her mind raced through the implications of Vincent's ultimatum. Every rational analysis led to the same conclusion. She should let Matthew go. He would find other employment, Emma would adapt to new circumstances, and Kira could continue building the career that had always defined her identity. But rationality felt inadequate when weighed against the memory of Emma's excited explanations about her robotics project, or Matthew's patient teaching as he helped his daughter understand complex programming concepts. These people had shown her what authentic relationship looked like, and the prospect of losing that connection to preserve her professional standing felt like trading something precious for something hollow. At 11:30 a.m., her assistant buzzed with an urgent call. "Miss Thalvin, there's a Dr. Sarah Chun from Stanford on line 2. She says it's regarding Dr. Matthew Sindrel and extremely time-sensitive." Kira's pulse quickened as she accepted the call. Dr. Chun's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously by powerful people. "Ms. Thalvin, I understand that Dr. Sindrel is currently employed by your company in a custodial capacity. I'm calling to offer him a position as lead researcher in our new Artificial Intelligence Ethics Institute, with a starting salary of $400,000 annually plus equity participation." "I see," Kira managed, her stomach sinking. "We've been trying to locate Dr. Sindrel for months. His work on AI ethical frameworks is exactly what we need for our Defense Department partnership. The position would allow him to continue his groundbreaking research while maintaining reasonable work-life balance. We understand he has family considerations that are important to him. Have you spoken with Dr. Sindrel about this opportunity?" "We haven't been able to reach him directly, which is why I'm contacting you as his current employer. We're hoping you might facilitate an introduction. This represents a chance for him to return to the academic work he was born to do." After ending the call, Kira sat in stunned silence. The universe seemed determined to remove Matthew from her life one way or another. If Vincent didn't fire him for security reasons, Stanford would lure him away with opportunities that perfectly matched his expertise and values. Either way, she would lose someone who had become unexpectedly important to her. The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Thalvin, security reports that Dr. Sindrel has arrived for his shift. Mr. Ashworth has requested that he be detained in conference room B pending your decision about his employment status." Kira's anger flared at Vincent's presumption. Detaining Matthew like a criminal violated basic respect and dignity, treating him as a security threat rather than someone who had saved their company. The action revealed Vincent's true attitude toward people he considered beneath his notice. "Tell security to release Dr. Sindrel immediately, and schedule an emergency board meeting for 4 p.m. today." "Ma'am, Mr. Ashworth specifically instructed. Mr. Ashworth doesn't run this company. I do. Release Dr. Sindrel now." Kira found Matthew in conference room B, sitting calmly despite being essentially imprisoned by corporate security. His dignity remained intact even in circumstances designed to humiliate him, a quiet strength that reminded her why she had been drawn to him in the first place. "I'm sorry about this," she said as security left them alone. "Vincent Ashworth has decided you represent a security risk and wants you terminated immediately." Matthew nodded without surprise. "I expected this might happen eventually. My background was bound to surface once people started paying attention. Stanford University called this morning. They want to offer you a position leading their AI Ethics Institute. 400,000 annually, plus the chance to return to the research you left behind. That's a generous offer. You don't sound excited. I'm grateful for the recognition, but my priorities haven't changed. Emma needs stability more than I need professional validation. Taking a high-pressure academic position would mean returning to the same lifestyle that I walked away from 3 years ago. Kira studied his face, searching for signs of regret or longing. Don't you want to resume the work you were meant to do? This could be your chance to influence the future of artificial intelligence, to ensure that the technology serves humanity rather than replacing it. I'm already doing the work I was meant to do, Matthew replied. Raising Emma, teaching her to use her intelligence compassionately, showing her that knowledge should serve others rather than just advancing careers. That's more important than any research project. But you could do both. Stanford would provide resources, graduate students to assist with your work, the opportunity to train the next generation of AI researchers. At what cost? 60-hour weeks. Constant travel, pressure to publish and secure funding, competition with colleagues for recognition and resources. I've lived that life, Kira. It's exciting and rewarding in some ways, but it's also consuming and ultimately empty if you don't have people who matter more than the work itself. His certainty about values that seemed backwards to her was both frustrating and inspiring. Matthew had achieved everything she was still chasing: recognition, respect, the opportunity to shape his field, and had voluntarily walked away to prioritize relationship over achievement. Vincent is forcing me to choose, she said finally. Either you take a development position here, which would destroy the schedule you need for Emma, or you're fired as a security liability. He's also made it clear that my own position is in jeopardy if I don't demonstrate appropriate priorities. Then the choice is simple. Accept my termination and focus on protecting your career. You've worked too hard to let sentiment compromise your success. What if I don't want success that requires abandoning people who matter? Matthew looked at her with surprise and something that might have been hope. What are you saying? I'm saying that watching you navigate your choices has made me question everything I thought I wanted. You've shown me what authentic relationship looks like, what it means to prioritize love over ambition. I don't want to lose that, even if keeping it costs me everything I've built. Kira, you can't sacrifice your career for someone you've known for a few weeks. That's not practical or sustainable. Maybe practicality is overrated. Maybe some things are worth risking everything for. She stood up, her decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Vincent thinks he can force me to choose between my position and my values, but he's miscalculated. If the board wants a CEO who treats employees like disposable assets and prioritizes image over substance, they can find someone else. That's incredibly risky. You could lose everything. Or I could gain something more valuable than everything. I thought I wanted. Kira walked toward the door, then turned back to face him. Matthew, I know this complicates things between us, but I need you to know that you've changed how I see the world. Watching you choose love over achievement, family over recognition, authenticity over advancement, it's shown me possibilities I never considered. What possibilities? The possibility that success isn't about accumulating achievements, but about building relationships. The possibility that intelligence is only valuable when it's coupled with compassion. The possibility that someone like me might actually deserve someone like you, if I'm brave enough to become the person capable of loving and being loved. As she headed toward the boardroom to confront Vincent and potentially sacrifice everything she had worked to build, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The terrifying excitement of choosing hope over security, love over control, and the unknown rewards of vulnerability over the familiar protection of emotional isolation. The next few hours would determine whether courage was enough to overcome the forces that insisted successful people couldn't afford authentic relationships, and whether love was strong enough to survive in a world that measured worth in quarterly profits rather than daily kindness. The emergency board meeting lasted 3 hours and ended with Vincent Ashworth's resignation rather than Kira's termination. Her presentation had been simple but devastating. Matthew's intervention had saved the company $800 million in a single night. His expertise had enhanced their AI beyond its original capabilities, and his character represented exactly the kind of ethical foundation that modern technology companies needed to maintain public trust. Dr. Sindrel doesn't represent a security risk, she had told the assembled board members. He represents the solution to our greatest challenge: developing artificial intelligence that serves humanity rather than replacing it. His insights into ethical reasoning frameworks are what made our Defense Department's success possible. When board member Dr. Patricia Williams had asked about the personal nature of Kira's interest in retaining Matthew, her response had been honest, enough to surprise everyone, including herself. "Yes, I care about Dr. Sindrel personally. He's shown me that intelligence without compassion is worthless, that success without relationship is empty, and that leadership means protecting people rather than using them. If this board believes those are inappropriate values for a CEO to hold, then you should indeed find my replacement." The vote to retain both Kira and Matthew had been unanimous, with Vincent as the sole dissenting voice before his dramatic exit. 6 months later, Kira stood in the kitchen of the house she now shared with Matthew and Emma in the quiet suburb of Brookwood Heights, watching her unconventional family prepare for Emma's 10th birthday party. The house was modest compared to her former penthouse, but it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. Matthew had eventually accepted a consulting role with Nexus Technologies that allowed him to contribute to AI ethics research while maintaining his priority schedule with Emma 3 days a week. He worked on cutting-edge projects that were revolutionizing how artificial intelligence systems made moral decisions. The other 4 days belonged entirely to his daughter and, increasingly, to the woman who had risked everything to ensure he could keep both worlds in balance. "The robot needs more frosting," Emma announced, carefully decorating a cake shaped like her latest robotics project. At 10, she had already won 2 state science competitions and been accepted into a gifted program that let her take high school-level programming courses. "Your robot looks perfect," Kira replied, adding candles with the same meticulous attention to detail she once reserved for quarterly reports. "But maybe we should save some frosting for the actual eating part." "Kira's right," Matthew said, emerging from the dining room where he had been setting up Emma's science demonstration station. "Though I have to admit, edible robotics is a creative approach to party planning." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of Emma's classmates and their families. As the house filled with laughter and excited conversations about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and whether robots would ever truly understand human emotions, Kira marveled at how completely her life had transformed. She was still CEO of Nexus Technologies, but the company now operated with different priorities. Employee satisfaction had become as important as profit margins. Ethical considerations drove technology development rather than being added as afterthoughts. The overnight success story had become a model for how corporate leadership could balance achievement with humanity. "Are you happy?" Matthew asked during a quiet moment as they watched Emma explain her latest invention to fascinated parents. Kira considered the question seriously. Her former definition of happiness had involved recognition, control, and the accumulation of achievements that impressed strangers. Now happiness meant Sunday morning breakfast with people who loved her regardless of her professional accomplishments, helping Emma with homework that challenged her own understanding, and falling asleep next to someone who chose her every day rather than just needing her for what she could provide. "I'm happy," she said, meaning it more completely than she ever had before. I'm finally living a life worth living rather than just building a resume worth reading. As Emma's party continued around them, filled with brilliant young minds discussing how technology could make the world better, Kira understood that the greatest success story wasn't about a CEO who saved her company or a janitor who revealed his hidden expertise. It was about two broken people who had learned that healing happened through connection, that strength came from vulnerability, and that the most important problems in life couldn't be solved with algorithms. They could only be solved with love. Up. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.